So, Dark Souls. Everybody's heard of it. Probably everybody's played it at this point, even the people that haven't ever finished it. um, you know, Soulsborne is the genre typing that has been given to those types of games, I guess. And I wouldn't even say that Dark Souls was the first to ever do it, but it was definitely the first to really fine tune it. Um, to the point now to where it's, a highly recognized gaming title. But today, I want to touch on a game that I feel like people who are either new to the type of genre, I want to give something different a try, or even Soulsborne fans that have never heard of these games or have seen them and been like, "Oh, that's weird, that's icky." Um, just to give a rundown of the stuff in the game that's really cool, really fun, just to give it a shot. Now, without rambling further on, the game I'm talking about is The Surge 2. The Surge 2 is the sequel to Deck 13's first installment, The Surge, which, if I remember correctly, came out around 2015, 2016, somewhere around there. I probably am wrong on that date, so don't quote me on that, but I'm just kind of throwing that out from memory. Um, so, what I'm going to do with the video is just touch on some points that I feel like should be addressed as far as like combat and the environment, so on and so forth. Stuff that I feel like you should kind of know a little more in depth about versus these brief reviews that people give like in 3 minutes and 4 minutes to just say, hey, game good, game bad, blah blah blah. Um, don't really want to just typecast it into that oblivion, but just a little more detail. It's not going to hurt. So, without further ado, let's get into the video. So, the first thing I want to touch on is just a broad stroke of overall combat mechanics. Weapons, drone modules, elemental effects, just stuff like that, how they work now versus the first game. Um, so, overall combat in the Surge 2, you can feel is a little more tuned in and focused on as far as what it was in the first game. And I'll go ahead and preface before I go any farther in is, I'm going to be making a lot of comparisons to the first game, and personally, I feel like not everybody needs to play the first installment to get into the sequel. The sequel does a good enough job of touching on, the lore and the background and stuff that happened in the first game and how it affect the outside world that you don't really need to go back and play it unless you want to be, you know, as invested in it as possible. And compared to the second game, the first game's got some problems, but it's not impossible to get through, and it's not impossible to take your time with. Um, it can be annoying at times, and even this game can be annoying at times. But I can feel the difference as far as the effort and the eyes that were put on to certain mechanics in this game and how they've been tweaked. So, like I said, continue on with the overall combat. It's definitely a little more in tune than what it was in the first game as far as like weapon cooldown, weapon wind up, the general clunkiness of some things. An example I can give is in the first installment, I did not touch one-handed weapon types. I thought they were completely useless, to be honest. I stuck with the staff pretty much the entire game, yeah. And in the second game when I started, I was like, oh, I'll just do the same thing. Well, about a quarter of the ways through it, I switched to one-handed weapon types because I picked up certain things that were, some of them were like katanas, so on and so forth, and I just thought they were really cool. And lo and behold, I mean, they definitely could do some damage, but in the first game, it just never felt that way to me. You can tell that they have definitely took a little more time in sort of tweaking the stuff. Not to mention they added, a few different new weapon archetypes. Nothing mind-blowing, but a little more variety. It's not going to really hurt. It gives you a little more stuff to play with. Um, Beyond that, I would say that compared to how the drones work and the giant overhaul that the drone's done, the weapon combat and fluidity to it, it's not that much different than it was in the first game. It's definitely really fun to get into these situations where you're swinging and you're looking at your stamina and you're blocking and you're parrying and so on and so forth. Um, but compared to how like the parry system that's been added and the drone overhaul that's been done, not that big of a deal. Um, Continuing on, the drone overhaul is amazing. Now, if you're just going to jump into the second game, you're not going to really know this, but the first game, the drone was pretty much useless, other than opening doors and stuff. It didn't offer a whole lot of crazy damage or build diversity as far as it does with the second game. The second game, there's a handful of different drones that you can use that all do these little, most of them are going to shoot a bullet or whatever, but a lot of them do these really cool things like shooting an electric, I think it's called the starfish or whatever. It shoots like this stun buildup, so on and so forth. Pretty much halfway through my first gameplay session, I pretty much built my in-game build around drone stuff. It's awesome. I couldn't do that in the first game. I could do it in the second game, and it was really cool. I enjoyed it. The drone is definitely where, even if you don't use it as a mainstay, it's worth it in almost any situation where you need just a little push or a little extra damage, so on and so forth. The drone really does a good job in this game versus how it was in the first. So next up is the elemental effects. So the way they work, in the first game, there were elemental sort of weapon additions, I guess. I don't know. They didn't necessarily take place or show up very often. It was kind of hard to tell unless you were really paying attention. In the second game, they changed it in the fact that there is an elemental buildup. So if you're doing fire damage, if you're doing nano damage, so on and so forth, a meter will start to build. And once that meter builds to full, the effect will take place. It's really cool and really useful. And you're seeing it, obviously, versus how it was in the first game, which you didn't ever really know if it was even happening or not. So I definitely liked the elemental stuff. Now, I didn't stick with the elements and the different weapon stuff with that for very long. I did have a few of them favorited, like the poison stuff, just if I needed it, if I knew that certain bosses or enemies had that certain weakness, just to put them down really quick. But the elemental effect stuff, compared to the first game, it's so much better. And now the next thing I want to touch on is the parrying system that's been added. So in the first game, there was this weird thing where, it was cool enough, but if you blocked, you could hold the block and then hit up and down on I think it was the movement stick or the camera stick, whichever one, and you could jump or duck, and you could dodge basically attacks. For one, it was a little weird because some enemies can move pretty fast, they're a little wonky. It was kind of hard to telegraph it because of how the camera was. Now, in the second game, they did away with that and they added a parrying system. Basically, you block and then you tap in the direction that the attack is coming, and if you match the direction the attack is coming, you parry it. And then once they're parried, the enemy will sort of recoil back, and when you see them recoil back, you can hit the attack button. Basically do, a fair bit of extra damage. It's cool enough. It's not nothing mind-blowing. I kept you'll get it early on. I kept the parry directional implant pretty much on my character the entire time, just because it just made it so much easier. I'm fairly certain there are people out there that don't need it, especially if they practiced with this. But definitely with the parry system, it's very useful against, if not most bosses, just about all bosses. There were a couple of bosses where I was having a tough time, and I was like, I kind of need to just sort of parry through it to get that stun, and then do that extra damage. Basically, once I've gone through those those block and parry phases. It's kind of different with several bosses and how many times you have to parry them. But it's fairly straightforward. I mean, if you practice it, in the beginning of the game, they give you enough, easy enemies to learn the parry stuff with. So, but it's a lot better than what the original system was. And that's actually something else I wanted to sort of touch on, or is, I guess you could say, a sort of boss overhaul. The first game, base game, only had like 5 bosses. That was it through the whole game. And it's not, these games aren't necessarily the longest stint of time you can invest in something. But with the sequel, they really, they're like, all right, more bosses, obviously. I think, if I can remember off the top of my head, there are 11 or 12 total bosses in the base game alone. Now, they're not all mind-blowing bosses, and not all of them are challenging. There are a few that are that can get kind of annoying. But it's at a steady pace, and that steady pace, it makes it worth it. Coming in, even if it's not the hardest thing in the world, but coming in knowing you're about to come into the next fight, and knowing you're about to get a little bit of a challenge or a little bit of change in the pace. I mean, it's definitely better than how it was in the first game, which, I mean, with only 5 bosses, they weren't spread out an insane distance apart that, it'd be like, oh, it's just another robot boss or what have you. They definitely did a better job in the second game as far as how many bosses are in it, and not necessarily the vast amount of differences in these bosses, but it's fun enough, either way. It's definitely worth that steady climb, I guess you could say. Alright, so the next thing I want to touch on is the environment. So, the environment is interesting enough, but because it doesn't have the allure of the open-endedness that the Souls games have, once you transition to a new area, the loading screens can break the stride a bit. However, it isn't entirely a deal breaker. I do get a feel of just how huge Jericho City truly is, as it is well detailed with the backgrounds presented throughout the game. I enjoyed my time, sort of rubbing around the alleys and the streets. There's definitely a little bit more of an exploration vibe put in once you get into the city and the streets and so on and so forth. But the overall allure of just how giant the city is doesn't necessarily get touched on all that greatly. There are enough different biomes in the game where it's like, hey, it's the sewer, it's the whatever. It changes it enough to keep it interesting. And I mean, not to mention, the game is, it's beautiful. The only thing about that gets a little aggravating is certain shadows in certain areas can be like really weird and not make any sense. Kind of later on, you can get into that when you get into certain areas, but I mean, overall, it's not necessarily a game breaker. It doesn't kill it. But like I said, because the open-endedness, like how it is in Dark Souls, it isn't there. That's kind of like, I can see that's what they were trying to aim for, but they still had to implement, the whole level transition, so on and so forth. It kind of kills the pacing, especially when you tell me it's a giant city with all this stuff around it, so on and so forth. But it's not nothing that's gonna kill the pacing outright. It's definitely something you can just sort of get used to, and the loading screens aren't even that viciously long. It's just one of those weird gripes, I guess you could say, that I have. Alright, so now here come the gripes, or what I'd like to say, the stuff that needs work. there's not necessarily a whole lot I really can think of off the top of my head that sort of consistently struck me as, okay, this is kind of stupid, kind of pointless. It's basically just stuff that could probably just get tweaked, and especially if they do another game, which I hope they do. Um, I have really enjoyed the sequel compared to the first game. The first game was like, all right, it's Dark Souls with exosuits or whatever. And the second game was like, all right, they took it and they kind of tweaked the mechanics and stuff a little bit more, and it's fun enough. So the first thing I want to touch on is the banner system. The banner system, in my opinion, seems like a waste of time. The issue with that, and what I mean by that, is that there's not a whole lot of mind-blowing places you can put that thing to where people can't get it. In my playthrough, I took my time. I went through all the little areas that I could see and get to, so on and so forth. And most of the time, the banners I was finding, you could tell someone was trying to put it in a like something where they thought they were being smart, I guess. But the reality of it is, it's never that hard to get to. And I mean, if you pick it up, I think it's like 200 tech scrap you get for finding it, versus if it goes, unfound for an extended period of time, you, as the person who placed the banner, can get up to, I believe it was 5,000 tech scrap. Which at first, that's useful in the beginning of the game. But you're going to hit a certain point where you're getting really comfortable with the combat, with enemy movement, so on and so forth, that you're getting that left and right. The banner, it completely becomes redundant to place that thing, other than to be, cute or whatever. With that, if there were ways to really sort of, get around certain stuff, like the issue I had the most of the time with trying to place that banner in interesting places was like I would hit an invisible wall. Couldn't go that way. Even though it looks like you could land there or jump there, you can't do it. So the banner system definitely needs to be it needs to be something. It needs to be kind of either tweaked or outright removed. It wouldn't really matter to me. The little bit of tech scrap reward you get, it's whatever. Like, it doesn't break the game, change the game in any mind-blowing way. I mean, there's probably people that have played the game that really did enjoy, putting that thing here and there. But it becomes redundant at a certain point, like I already said. The last thing I want to touch on, as far as my little gripe session goes with what I got, is the gear sets and the set bonus variation. Now, I could probably, more than likely am the only person to complain about this, but my biggest thing with the set bonus stuff is, after a certain point, when you're seeing the same, tier set bonuses pop up on these different gear sets, it becomes this thing where it's like, why bother? Like, I get there's like a heavy, a medium, and a light armor class. I understand that you want to try these different things and see what does what and what you can combine with what. But at a certain point, seeing these same things pop up over and over again on stuff that you would think, like certain armor sets near the end of the game, you'd figure like that stuff would have some like really cool or really unique set bonuses. They don't. It's stuff from about, I mean, you could even say, I think it was like 6 or 7 gear sets back, so on and so forth. Again, this is probably just a personal gripe from myself, but I feel like they could have done a little bit more with that. Maybe added this sort of, I guess, like almost like a legendary tier set bonus or something like that. I understand what they were aiming for. I get that they were wanting you to mix different stuff around to get like really certain things to stack and so on and so forth. I understand that. It's just at a certain point, once I got I think it was the 6-piece set of, like, it increases your Omnicell, which is like your drone ammo, and like you get drone ammo when you fill the energy bar, something like that. Once I got that and I knew I was doing a drone build, I was like, alright, well, everything else has become completely pointless. I'm not going to play it. There's no point in upgrading it. I'm just going to upgrade this one thing. It's what my build's based around. It's what makes the most sense. Yes, there were other sets that had little changes here and there to what you could do with the drone, but I mean, they show up multiple times on different gear sets. It was kind of pointless, you know. It makes it to where most people, it almost makes the loadout system redundant, because you could take the time to level up and keep 2 or 3 different armor sets at the same consistency that you're using, like your main build or whatever. If you want to have different builds for different things, like, I get that, but because everything doesn't really change all that much as far as the set bonuses and stuff, like, there's no point. Just stick with your main. Again, this is probably just like a me thing. This probably doesn't really even count towards most people, I would imagine, that played this game. But it's one of those things for me, and I think I'm spoiled from, like, playing Diablo and playing The Division and so on and so forth, about how set bonuses work and how gear set should be, you know, like this really crazy, game-changing, overpowered thing. But in reality, it's probably just me overthinking it and just wanting to complain about it. Alrighty, so the last little bit that I want to touch on before I, you know, let everybody go and take on what they have gathered from this opinion video or what have you, is that the Surge 2, it's not necessarily doing anything that's mind-blowing. But here's the thing, you know, until we get Elden Ring, which I don't really know off the top of my head how far out that is, you know, there's not gonna be any other Dark Souls games, if I would imagine, for quite some time. So we gotta take what we're given. And the Surge 2 is solid enough in its core gameplay and its concept, and especially on how it's been tweaked and improved versus the first game. Like I said, I don't feel like you need to play the first game to get into this one. It does enough of a job telling you what's going on, you know, without kind of spoiling anything, that, you know, you know what's happened. It's like, okay, it's happened. You know, we're moving on. We're going past it. The last thing I want to sort of touch on is, just briefly, is whether I think this game is, you know, worth full price or anything like that. To my knowledge, I believe this game has gone down to, like, I think it's like $35 now or something like that. For $35, it's worth it. There's replay value. I mean, once you keep going through the new game pluses, you can keep basically becoming, you know, stronger and stronger. If you want to feel like a god, it's going to let you feel like a god. Now, enemies do scale every time, but, you know, that's up to you if you want to keep doing that. But the thing about it that I sort of got from it is, it's, you know, for $35 or whatever, it's fine. You know, $15, yes, I would buy it. If you can find it for $15, $20, buy it. It's definitely worth that. The DLC that's come out, it's, you know, it's cool. It's got some stuff. I mean, I think I got like 5, probably not even, no, I didn't get 5 hours out of it. I probably got 3 hours out of the DLC. And I can't remember how much it was, if it was $10, $15, I can't remember. You know, if you've got that extra money laying around and you want to, if you've got it laying around, but if you want to try it, like, try it. It's not going to kill nothing. It's definitely worth it just to have a little bit more narrative and a couple more boss fights. But, you know, overall, it's not a bad game at all. I definitely recommend this, you know, you giving it a shot, especially if you're a fan of the Soulsborne genre. But, you know, just because it's different and, you know, it looks a little strange with the science fiction stuff or whatever, like, don't put it down because of that. It's a fairly solid game. and I'm hoping people will give it a shot. Especially, I think it's been on sale recently, so it's not that expensive. It's not a full price $60 game to my knowledge anymore, so it's definitely worth it just to try it. And I mean, if you don't like it, I mean, hey, you don't like it. That's what I tried to do here, is kind of show a little bit of the raw footage and just kind of give some points on, you know, the stuff that I thought was really interesting. I'm by no means a professional Surge player. You know, by no means have I ever been like mind-blowingly good at the Dark Souls games, but I played them all. I understand the concept and the mechanics behind it. So I definitely felt like this game is worth the highlight. So I hope everybody, will give it a try. But beyond that, I hope everybody enjoyed the video. Feel free to leave a comment, talk about it. I mean, if I can, I'll try to talk back. And hopefully we'll get some people on the game. But until the next video, I hope everybody has a good day or night and whatever, and see ya.